Some people take alone time to a level most of us can't even imagine. Not just away from the city, but away from neighbors, roads, signals, and noise itself. Homes carved into cliffs, a tiny shelter stranded in the ocean, a monastery clinging to stone like it was never meant to be reached. These aren't just places to live, they're places built to disappear. Today we're traveling across the world to explore 15 homes made for true isolation, the kind of solitude that feels peaceful to some and impossible to others. So here's the question: could you live like this? Or would the outside world pull you back? Imagine a place so high, so narrow, and so exposed. Even the wind feels like it has the right of way. This is Mount Huashan, one of China's most infamous peaks, known for trails that don't just climb, they cling. Razor-thin ledges, vertical stairways carved into stone, and those legendary plank walks, wooden boards bolted into the cliff, with nothing beneath you but air and distance. And somewhere up there, perched on the sheer edge of the mountain, like a secret left behind by time, sits the chess pavilion. A small stone structure, almost absurd in its loneliness, as if it was never meant to be reached at all. Legend says this is where immortals and ancient generals once played chess above the clouds, turning the mountaintop into a quiet battlefield of patience and strategy. But getting there isn't a story you tell casually. You cross crumbling paths, barely wide enough for 1 foot. You grip thin chains as your only reassurance. And with every step, the mountain forces the same thing from you: focus, calm, and courage. Exactly like a game of chess. Then, suddenly, you arrive. A pavilion surrounded by endless sky, jagged peaks in every direction. The modern world completely erased, replaced by silence, stone, and breath. The chess pavilion isn't just a landmark, it's a symbol that some places reveal themselves only to the determined, and that true isolation sometimes begins with one terrifying step. After Huashan, you'd think nothing could feel higher or more unreal. But in Bhutan, there's a place that doesn't just sit on a cliff, it feels fused to it. Locals call it Paro Taksang. The world knows it as Tiger's Nest. White walls, golden roofs, a monastery clinging to a sheer rock face, suspended above the Paro Valley like a vision, held in place by prayer. When clouds roll in, it doesn't look built at all. It looks summoned. And the journey to reach it is part of what makes it sacred. First, the road winds through pine forests and mountain bends. Then the climb begins, a steep trail that forces you to slow down. The air thins, your legs burn, your thoughts get quieter with every step. Along the path, prayer flags flutter like moving whispers, and ancient wheels turn, as if time itself is being softened. People come here from everywhere, not just hikers, pilgrims, travelers, curious souls in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, drawn by something deeper than a view. Because when you finally arrive, you don't just feel proud, you feel small in the best way. The valley opens beneath you, the wind turns gentle, the noise of life falls away. And for a moment, the world feels distant, not because you escaped it, but because you rose above it. Tiger's Nest isn't just a place to visit, it's a reminder that some sanctuaries can only be reached the hard way, and some kinds of peace don't exist anywhere else. If cliffs and mountains feel extreme, wait until your home is the ocean itself. Off the coast of Cornwall, England, there's a place that barely even qualifies as land. A single, jagged rock rising out of the Atlantic. No soil, no trees, no room to wander. Just waves, wind, and the constant pulse of the sea. This is Bishop Rock, and sitting on top of it is a lighthouse that looks less like a building and more like a fortress built to withstand a world that never stops attacking. No neighbors, no streets, no shops, no quiet evenings, just the cry of seabirds and the sound of water slamming into stone. Now picture living there. Storms don't pass by, they hit you head on. The horizon is your only view, and the weather is your only schedule. Some days the sea is calm enough to feel hypnotic. Other days it turns violent, sending rogue waves high enough to remind you who's really in control. For the lighthouse keepers who once worked here, isolation wasn't a vibe, it was the job. They kept the light burning through nights that never felt fully safe, guiding ships through some of the most treacherous waters in the region. Today the lighthouse is automated, but the structure still stands, stubborn and alone, like a monument to endurance. Bishop Rock is proof that humans don't just seek solitude in beautiful places. Sometimes they choose it in the harshest place imaginable and learn to call survival a kind of home. After all that stone, wind, and survival, the next kind of isolation comes wrapped in glass and luxury. In Dubai, escaping the outside world doesn't mean climbing a mountain or braving the Atlantic. It means stepping into a home that literally drops you beneath the surface of the sea. These are the floating Seahorse villas, part private island, part science fiction dream. From above, they look sleek and modern, floating quietly on the water. But the real twist is what happens when you go downstairs. Because these villas are built on 3 levels, an upper deck for sunbathing and stargazing, a main living floor surrounded by wide, floor-to-ceiling windows, and then the level that feels unreal, a submerged bedroom and bathroom beneath the waterline. Imagine waking up and not seeing a skyline, not seeing a street, but seeing fish drifting past your window like slow-moving thoughts, light rippling across the walls, the outside world reduced to silence and blue. And somehow it doesn't feel cramped. The rooms are designed to feel open and airy, with natural light pouring in through the glass, turning your bedroom into something like a private aquarium, except you're the one inside it. It's a different kind of solitude, not the rugged isolation of cliffs and storms, but the kind that makes you forget what day it is. A reminder that sometimes the ultimate escape isn't far away. It's just one level deeper. Dubai hides you beneath the water, but out in Utah, some homes hide in plain sight. In the rugged red rock country where sandstone cliffs rise like walls and the desert stretches for miles, there's a house that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shine. It doesn't stand out. It disappears. This is Cliff Haven House, an off-grid sanctuary built right into the landscape, carved into the side of a cliff and camouflaged by the natural rock around it. From a distance, you could look straight at it and never realize someone lives there. And that's the point, because this isn't just a home, it's a choice to step away from the noise, the schedule, the constant pull of modern life. Cliff Haven is designed to run without the grid, solar power, rainwater collection, and systems built for self-sufficiency. No neighborhood hum, no traffic outside the window, just wind moving through canyons and the kind of silence you can actually hear. Then you step inside, and it surprises you. The interior is modern, comfortable, and far more spacious than you'd expect from something hidden in stone. Large windows open up to sweeping canyon views, the kind that makes you pause mid-sentence. And when desert nights turn cold, a fireplace turns the whole space into something warm and steady. It's not about luxury in the usual sense. It's about freedom. Waking up to birdsong instead of notifications. Walking outside and seeing nothing but cliffs, sky, and distance. living in a place that feels like it was built not to impress anyone, but to protect your peace. Because sometimes the greatest upgrade isn't more connection, it's less. After homes that vanish into cliffs and sink beneath the sea, this next one feels like it didn't get built at all. It feels like it grew out of the earth. In the mountains of northern Portugal, there's a house so perfectly fused with its surroundings that at first glance it looks like a natural rock formation, something left behind by a landslide or shaped by time. This is Casa do Penedo, often called the Stone House, and its walls aren't made of bricks or concrete. They're made of 4 massive boulders, giant stones that form the foundation, the frame, and the shelter all at once. Built in the 1970s as a rural retreat for a family, it wasn't designed to be famous. It was designed to be quiet, private, grounded. The kind of place where you can sit by a fire and feel the world slow down. And inside, it's surprisingly livable. There's a cozy living space, a fireplace, and the kind of warmth that doesn't come from luxury. It comes from texture, weight, and simplicity. Even the landscape feels like part of the home, blurring the line between what's built and what's natural. Casa do Penedo is a reminder that isolation doesn't always have to be extreme. Sometimes it's gentle. Sometimes escaping the outside world isn't about running away. It's about returning to stone, to silence, to something older than all of us. A home like this doesn't just block out the noise, it makes you feel rooted again. Right about now, the mind starts to settle into a pattern. Cliffs, isolation, nature, silence. So let's break it with something we can't fully explain. This image was sent in by one of our subscribers, and while we can't confirm exactly where it is or who truly lives here, one thing feels unmistakable. Whoever built this place didn't want to be found. Tucked away from roads, from neighbors, from any sign of ordinary life, this home looks like a private world, the kind of place you build when privacy isn't a preference. It's a philosophy. According to the subscriber, the property belongs to an elderly couple. The story goes that they spent decades quietly building their wealth and then poured everything into this one project, a secluded retreat designed to shut the outside world out completely. And here's the part that makes it stick with you. Once the construction was finished, they moved in. And people say they haven't been seen or heard from since. No visitors, no noise, no trace. Just a house that feels like it's holding its breath. So let me ask you, honestly, could you live like that? Could you cut the cord so completely that the world forgets you're there? Or are your people, your friends, your routines, your noise too important to give up? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this one isn't just a place, it's a question. After that mystery, it's almost a relief to arrive somewhere real. In the rugged landscape of western Georgia, a limestone monolith rises out of the valley like a single, silent finger pointing toward the sky. Narrow, vertical, unforgiving. This is Katskhi Pillar, more than 130 feet tall, standing alone for centuries, wrapped in legend long before anyone could even reach its summit. And at the top, something almost unbelievable. A small church, perched on stone as if it was placed there by hand, not built by human effort. For generations, locals spoke of it like a rumor, a sacred place separated from the world, protected by height and hardship. It wasn't until the late 20th century that climbers finally made it up and confirmed what people had always whispered. The ruins of an ancient sanctuary were real. Today, a modest chapel dedicated to Saint Maximus the Confessor stands there again. And the only way up is a ladder that clings to the rock face. Steep, exposed, and so narrow it forces you into total focus. No room for distraction, no room for fear. Up there lives a single monk. No crowds, no noise, no city lights, just prayer, wind, and the slow rhythm of the sun moving across the valley below. Katskhi Pillar is a reminder that isolation isn't always an escape. Sometimes it's a discipline, a decision to step away from everything so you can finally hear what's inside you. Not every refuge is dramatic from a distance. Some are so carefully hidden, you could stand nearby and never notice them. In northern Italy, carved into a sheer cliff face above a quiet river valley, there's a place that looks less like a building and more like a secret. A small sanctuary pressed into stone, as if the mountain itself decided to make room. This is the Hermitage of San Colombano. According to tradition, it was founded in the early Middle Ages and is linked to Saint Columbanus, an Irish monk who traveled across Europe seeking solitude, discipline, and communion with the divine. The hermitage that bears his name feels like the purest form of that pursuit. A tiny chapel, simple living quarters, even a small garden, all clinging to a vertical wall, suspended between earth and sky. Reaching it isn't about adrenaline, it's about intention. A narrow path winds along the cliff, forcing you to slow down, to watch your steps, to listen. And as you approach, the outside world starts to thin out, not because it's far away, but because your attention has finally turned inward. Today, the Hermitage is no longer permanently inhabited, but it remains a place of pilgrimage, not for spectacle, but for stillness. Because San Colombano isn't the kind of isolation that shouts, it's the kind that whispers. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful escape isn't the one that takes you higher, but the one that makes you quieter. After cliffs and sanctuaries carved into stone, isolation takes a different shape. A single house, on a single island, surrounded by nothing but sky, sea, and silence. Off the southern coast of Iceland, where the North Atlantic crashes into rugged cliffs, lies Elliðaey, a tiny wind-swept speck of land that looks like it was forgotten by the modern world. And there, in the middle of a rolling green hillside, sits the image that's captivated millions online. A solitary white house, standing alone like the last page of a story. But it isn't a hidden billionaire's bunker, and it isn't a permanent home. The house was built in the 1950s by a hunting association, used as a simple lodge, a place for people to shelter from the weather and at times hunt puffins. There's no electricity, no running water, no neighbors, no convenience store around the corner, just rough conditions and raw beauty. And that's exactly why it feels so powerful. Because on Elliðaey, the world becomes smaller in the best way. Your news is the wind, your schedule is the tide, your noise is the ocean. This little house doesn't scream luxury, it whispers escape. A reminder that sometimes the most haunting kind of isolation isn't danger, it's the quiet possibility of living where nothing can reach you. Elliðaey feels like the world forgot it. But in the Faroe Islands, there's a village the world couldn't reach, even if it wanted to. On the island of Vágar, tucked between towering cliffs and a waterfall that spills straight into the Atlantic, sits Gásadalur, a tiny settlement that looks like a postcard and lived for centuries like a secret. For most of its history, getting here was an ordeal. There were no roads, no easy paths, only the sea, or a brutal hike over steep mountain ridges, with winds strong enough to make you lean just to stay upright. And so the village stayed small, just a handful of people living on the edge of the ocean, in a place where the weather writes the rules. Life moved slower here, shaped by sheep, storms, and the quiet strength of a close-knit community. Then came the twist. In 2004, a tunnel was blasted through the mountain, finally connecting Gásadalur to the rest of Vágar. For the first time, you could drive into what had once been almost unreachable. But something surprising happened. Even with a road, the village didn't lose its stillness. It kept its hush. Its isolation became less dangerous, but not less real. The cliffs still stand like walls. The waterfall still roars. The Atlantic still stretches outward like an endless boundary. Today, travelers make the journey not because they have to, but because they want to feel what it's like to live where the world ends. Gásadalur proves something simple. Sometimes you can build a tunnel through a mountain and still not fully reach the silence on the other side. Not every isolated place was built for peace. Some were built for work, for survival, for an era that refused to slow down. Deep in Colorado's high country, near the Crystal River, there's a structure that looks almost unreal against the mountains. A small wooden building perched beside rushing water, framed by towering peaks in golden aspens. This is the Crystal Mill, also known as the Old Mill. Built in 1892, it wasn't a cozy cabin. It was a powerhouse. The river's force was harnessed to generate electricity for the nearby Sheep Mountain mine. Back then, this wasn't a quiet escape. It was loud, mechanical, relentless. A place where wilderness wasn't a backdrop. It was the price of ambition. Then time moved on. The mine went silent. The tunnels were abandoned, and the mill, somehow, stayed. Even reaching it still feels earned. There's no smooth highway to this spot. You take a rough jeep road, bouncing through canyon turns, surrounded by nothing but forest, rock, and altitude. And when the mill finally appears, it feels like discovering a preserved fragment of history, weathered, alone, and still listening to the river that once powered it. Crystal Mill is more than a photo. It's a reminder that isolation isn't always chosen for calm. Sometimes it was chosen because there was no other way. And now, all that's left is the quiet. If you can't get a package delivered, you're not remote. On Tristan da Cunha, the ocean decides when the world shows up. Far out in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from any continent, volcanic peaks rise from the waves in a place where the horizon feels endless and the sea stretches in every direction. This is Tristan da Cunha, often described as the most remote inhabited archipelago on Earth. A few hundred people live here, not visiting, not passing through, living. And in a world built on instant delivery and constant connection, that reality feels almost impossible. Because on Tristan, isolation isn't a weekend retreat. It's a permanent condition. The ocean provides what it can: fish, weather, the occasional calm. But it also tests everything: supplies, travel, communication, even patience. The weather shifts fast, and when the sea says no, the island listens. Plans change, visits get delayed. Time becomes something you adapt to, not something you control. So the community learns something most of us have forgotten: self-sufficiency. People rely on fishing, small-scale farming, and, most importantly, each other. Work isn't just individual, it's communal. When conditions get tough, you don't figure it out alone. You lean on the bonds that isolation forces you to build. And that's the paradox. Tristan is one of the most isolated places on Earth, yet it may be one of the least lonely. Traditions are kept alive because there's nowhere else to outsource them. Stories get passed down because they're part of survival. The island becomes its own rhythm, its own culture, built not in spite of the distance, but because of it. For the rare visitor who makes it here, Tristan da Cunha doesn't feel like a destination. It feels like a time capsule of resilience. A reminder that even at the very edge of the world, people don't just endure, they build a life worth staying for. Not every escape looks like a fortress. Some escapes look like nothing at all. Deep in Egypt's western desert, in the heart of the Siwa Oasis, there's a place built to blend into the land so completely it almost disappears into the sand and stone. This is Adrère Amellal, and it isn't the kind of luxury the modern world recognizes. There's no electricity, no Wi-Fi, no TVs humming in the background, no bright screens pulling your mind in 10 directions. The lodge is built from natural materials, salt rock, desert clay, and traditional Siwan craftsmanship, shaped by local hands the way it's been done for generations. Every room is different, simple, earthy, quiet, and when night arrives, something extraordinary happens. The entire property glows, not with bulbs, but with hundreds of candles and lanterns, turning the desert into a soft, golden dream. Shadows move gently across stone walls. The air cools. The world outside feels impossibly far away. Here you don't unplug with a button. You unplug because there's nothing to plug into. Days slow down. You swim in natural springs. You drift in salt lakes that shimmer under the sun. You wander ancient ruins and eat meals grown and prepared on site, close to the earth, close to the moment. Even famous visitors have come here for that exact reason, not to be seen, but to disappear for a while. And then, the stars. In the desert with no city glow, the sky doesn't just sparkle, it opens. Endless, silent, almost overwhelming. Adrère Amellal feels like a resolution, the quiet answer to everything we've seen. Because after cliff monasteries and storm-battered rocks, this place reminds you, isolation isn't always about danger or distance. Sometimes it's about returning to stillness, to darkness, to candlelight, to the part of you that only speaks when the world finally goes quiet. And maybe that's the real reason people build places like this. Not because they hate the outside world, but because they're trying to find themselves again. Sometimes the quietest kind of escape isn't built from scratch. Sometimes it's rescued. Tucked into the Italian countryside, among vineyards, rolling hills, and long stretches of silence, there's a place that once gathered people together and now holds one person's solitude. A small church believed to date back to around the 10th century. For centuries it stood through wars, disease, and the slow reshaping of the world. But eventually, the congregation faded. The doors closed. The building slipped into disrepair, not destroyed, just forgotten. Left to weather quietly, as if history had decided it was finished with it. Until someone saw it differently. Instead of letting it crumble, they turned it into a home. Not by erasing what it was, but by preserving it. Thick stone walls that still carry the weight of time. Original features kept alive. Modern comforts added carefully, like a whisper, not a takeover. And outside, nothing but nature. Birdsong, wind through trees, and the calm that comes when there's no one around to interrupt it. Imagine living inside a structure that has watched 1,000 years go by and hearing only leaves and silence where there used to be hymns. It's the softest kind of isolation, not the drama of cliffs or oceans, but the deep peace of a place that's already been through everything and survived. And maybe that's the final idea these homes leave behind. A sanctuary isn't always about hiding from the world. Sometimes it's about transforming what the world leaves behind into something that can hold you. A refuge, a second life, a quiet kind of sacred. Because in the end, escaping the outside world isn't really the point. The point is finding a place, any place, where you can finally feel at home inside yourself. So now we'll leave you with one final question, and I want you to be specific. If you could live in just one of these places, which would you choose, and why? Would you climb to the chest pavilion on Mount Huashan, where every step feels like a test of nerve? Would you sleep beneath the sea in Dubai's underwater villa, with the ocean drifting past your window? Or would you disappear into silence on Elliðaey Island, with nothing but wind and open sky? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them all, and I'm genuinely curious which kind of escape speaks to you. And if you want to relive the most intense moments, go back and watch those 3 segments again. They hit differently the second time. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world's most secluded sanctuaries. If you enjoyed it, Give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more amazing discoveries. And until next time, stay curious.